and we are excited today to be launching Option+Shift, which is our brand new series of online talks featuring digital artists and curators whose work showcase some of the diverse conversations and perspectives being explored through digital media today. And through this series of talks, we are hoping to not only broaden our understanding of the digital medium, but also become exposed to the different ways of working digitally, which has taken on even more relevance in our current COVID reality. Digital media has become a way for us to bridge social distance gaps, continue working remotely, as well as connecting to our communities online. And by talking about their respective practices, we hope that these speakers will help us to think even more expansively about what digital practices look like today. So I am really, really excited to start this series with our very first speaker, Katie Kotler. Katie is an artist working in digital animation, installation, music, and much more. Really big thank you to Katie for being our first speaker in the series. But before I go on, I just want to start with a land acknowledgement. So we wish to express our gratitude and acknowledge that our work today takes place on traditional Indigenous territories across Ontario. Artcite is located on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacies of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. And that through these online platforms, we are able to host conversations with guests across other cities, including Toronto, which is the ancestral traditional territories of the Ojibwa, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. We would also like to recognize that an acknowledgement is just an acknowledgement and is not an act of reconciliation in itself, and should prompt us as settlers to think about our responsibilities to this land, as well as our relationships to Indigenous groups who continue to be negatively impacted by the legacy of colonialism, which we as settlers continue to benefit from. It is our responsibility as settlers to educate ourselves on these issues, especially as we see ongoing injustices that continue to happen against Indigenous communities today, as well as to find ways to take actions towards reconciling these inequities within our country. So thank you for that. So before I hand things over to Katie, I just want to go over a little bit about the format for today's talk, as well as point out some of the Zoom functions that we'll be using. In a moment, I'll pass things over to Katie, and Katie will speak a bit about her practice. And then after that, we'll go into more of a Q&A discussion session. If you have any questions for Katie that come up for you during the talk, the really great thing about Zoom is that Zoom has a chat function. And you can just find at the bottom of your Zoom window, there should be a button that says chat. And when you open up that button, it should bring a text window to the side where you can type out your questions. And then during the Q&A, I will read those questions out to Katie. But if you have a question that you'd like to ask Katie yourself, during Q&A, we can use the raise hand function. And basically, that's just a function that we can use to coordinate unmuting anybody who wants to speak to Katie directly. But yes, I'll go over how to do all that in more detail and go over everything again when we actually reach the Q&A portion. Okay, and with that said, I think I'm going to hand things over to Katie.
Hello.
Hi, Katie.
Okay, should we make sure that everyone is muted or not muted before we start?
Yes, I believe everybody is, yeah.
Okay, cool. Great. Well, hello, I'm Katie Kotler, and I am a media artist. And I wanted to thank Ron and Lucas for inviting me here to speak today. In this artist talk, I'm going to be speaking about my relationship to forced domesticity and art making. So at different times throughout the past 8 years, I've been stuck at home because of health-related conditions. This has stirred in me a desire to produce nurturing and calming spaces. In this artist talk, I'll tell you a bit about my story, my art process, some of my inspirations and concerns. I'll show you some highlights of my upcoming work and leave you with some final thoughts. After that, we'll have a Q&A. So, about my work. My practice explores how the physicality of animation can be translated into installation, print, and music. I'm also interested in how lineages of art histories meld into one another, often in previously unnoticed ways. I create immersive and self-reflexive atmospheres that use as lo-fi materials as possible. My work's been featured on the CBC, Hyperallergic, Rhizome and Canadian Art. Here's an animation that I made back in 2016 called Obsidian. It was featured on the CBC show, The Exhibitionists. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Katie, is there audio with this?
There's not.
Okay, sorry.
So as you can see, I like to create abstract animations that showcase bright colors and shapes. I use these to project onto different fabrics. The story that I'm about to tell is incredibly personal, and I feel very vulnerable sharing it with so many strangers. It's the first time that I'm talking about certain life experiences in public. I think it's beneficial to share my story though, because I hope that I can help someone else who's going through something similar. Like Anais Nin said, the personal, if it is deep enough, becomes universal, mythical, and symbolic. So,
sound editing is very much like sex. It's usually done alone, late at night, surrounded by electronic gadgets.
So, in my undergrad, I studied electroacoustics and women's studies at Concordia University, and I started making computer music in 2005 under the name Chanticleer. In 2011, after moving from Montreal to Toronto, I began to experiment with video art using the electroacoustics theory of musique concrète. Britannica defines musique concrète as the experimental technique of musical composition using recorded sounds as raw material. The technique was developed in 1948 by the French composer Pierre Schaeffer. The foundation of musique concrète lies in the collection of various natural sounds recorded onto tape to produce a montage of sound. During the preparation of such a composition, the sounds selected and recorded may be modified in any way desired. They can be played backward, cut short or extended, subjected to echo chamber effects, varied in pitch and intensity, and so on. The finished composition thus represents the combination of varied auditory experiences into an artistic unity. So for people who are more visual artists, you might be familiar with Norman McLaren, the animator. He's kind of a guy that incorporated both of these kinds of ideas. So I'm going to play you a song that I wrote in 2007 called Detective Foley, about my love for Eddie Murphy in the film Beverly Hills Cop. When I made this, I was really into Tangerine Dream. so that's a clip from that. The next piece that I'm going to show you is a video that I made in 2012 called Meat Lovers. It's based off of the 1990 book, The Sexual Politics of Meat by Carol J. Adams. It combines concepts from musique concrète into video art and some feminist theory. In July 2012, I was living in Toronto and planning to do an MFA at OCAD. I was biking home one night from work and I got doored. I developed a concussion and had to quit my job and defer a year of grad school because I was so out of it. I had symptoms like neck pain, jaw pain, sensitivity to light and noise, visual issues, dizziness, balance issues, memory and cognition issues, anxiety, and difficulties with sleep that have, all of these symptoms have currently become part of my daily life. I spent a year alone in my apartment in a dreamlike state known as brain fog. Previously, I was a very cerebral person, an overthinker. Now days would pass where I'd stare at a wall, unable to answer emails or go outside. That first year after the accident, the brain injury changed what I thought were fixed parts of my personality. Before the accident, I prided myself on being able to dance for hours at after parties and I could make music for hours on end. Post-accident, I could go for 15-minute walks a few times a week and spend the rest of my time venturing from my bed to my couch. I started to learn the value of having a warm and comfortable domestic space. I began to understand the merits of things that I previously had considered to be part of women's domains. Things like cooking, sewing, watering plants, using essential oils, and listening to folk music. The brain injury forced me to embrace softness. Almost a year into the accident, I compiled songs that I'd been working on and made an album called Dance Madness. Most of these songs were written before the accident. Some of them, however, like Wave Pool, were made after the accident. So yeah, being at home alone with a brain injury, sometimes it just feels like it's you and your tinnitus. just a clip. I think I picked that song as an example because I think it really illustrates what it feels like to have brain fog. It kind of just feels like your brain is underwater, moving really slowly, and you're really calm in this way that's just brain damage a bit, you know? So yeah, I began graduate school in 2013 with the help of a lot of stimulants. Those drugs had me making algorithmic heavy animations such as Bevel. Oh, before I play it, I just want to say that the music, I didn't make the music. An artist named G Hasid made the music for this. In December 2014, I was diagnosed with endometriosis. For those of you who aren't familiar with endometriosis, it's defined as a disorder where the tissue that makes up the lining of the womb grows outside of the uterus. My endo was so severe that doctors thought that it might be ovarian cancer. I was prescribed a bunch of opioids and tranquilizers and had surgery in June 2015. Here's a photo of what that looked like. So I had this like giant tumor that was 4 times the size of my ovary. And one of the reasons why I'm showing you this is because with a brain injuries are invisible. So people can't really ever tell that something's wrong with you. And often when you're trying to tell them, they don't necessarily believe you. And with endometriosis, you could see that there's something physically wrong with you. So yeah, I again took time off of school and ended up adding an extra year to my studies. I spent the time mostly stoned on drugs in bed and getting medical tests done. Around this time, I was so panicked with all of these crises that kept happening in my life. I made this animation, Respite. In this animation, the music is frantic and the title is a plea for stability. After the surgery, my doctors persuaded me to go on a drug that put my body into menopause. Let me tell you, menopause sucks. Avoid it for as long as you possibly can. Hot flashes, insomnia, and depression turned me into my mother. Previously, my hobbies included thrifting at Value Village and dancing to Bananarama. Menopause lurched me into buying Banana Republic sweaters and relaxing to Paul Simon. In 2015, I hosted a New Year's Eve dinner party, and my favorite part of the party was organizing the leftovers in my fridge. At this time, I began making what my thesis advisor called sad rainbow drawings. You can see them here. This is my series called Cheveux Statique. I have Sunset, Nicholas, Sunset, Rev Cauchemar, and Body Jazz. Eventually, I went off of the pills and have been living with relative stability ever since. My brain injury still affects me every day, though. I can't go to noisy and crowded places without worrying that I'll need to stay in bed the following day. The same goes for working too hard or too long. Needless to say, these ordeals have taken a huge toll out of me. I feel older than I am, and I'm quite risk averse. My vibe went from being complicated and shrewd to being a sporty grandma. I used to party, and now I watch The Good Wife. Yeah, so March 2020, COVID. At long last, it seems that the world is living at my pace. In many ways, COVID has been great for me and my brain injury. To be honest, listening to people complain about not being able to do things that they previously could has been a bit bittersweet for me. A lot of the FOMO that I've had since 2012 has dissipated. As an artist, I feel like I'm finally allowed to hunker down and make my work without as many distractions as before. Zoom is better for my brain injury than physical meetings. I don't have to recover from hustling through the city. I don't miss a lot of public social things. I couldn't really do them anyways. Now I have the solace to make work guilt-free. Prior to the accident, art making was an escapist way of exploring and indulging in strong emotions. After the accident and my illness, my work has been about creating idealistic and relaxed spaces. Here is Celeste, an installation that I made in 2016 for a group show called Escaped Camp CMYK at the OCAD Student Gallery. It's an interpretation of a digital pond and sky. In a way, respite was the first sign that I was yearning for some peace, but Celeste was the first time that I allowed myself to embrace it by looking to nature. So you can't really see, but there's a projector that is projecting animation onto these two round mirrors that are angled and facing the walls. Here is another animation that I made called Fantôme Déchiré. It's an animation that I started working on where I think a lot of my current ideas were formed. For this animation, I took images from old architectural digest and traced my animations onto them. This animation marks the beginning of my obsession with interior design and comfort. Now my installation work is trying to create the physical manifestation of this. The song here, Beauty Sleep, was written in 2013, a month after my father died. Grief can also make you stay home. is Soft and Cozy, an animation that I made while participating in an at-home residency organized by the Drake Hotel. It's about exhaustion and grief. I created it during Canada Day weekend when I was particularly burnt out from taking on too many projects in my professional life. I'd spent the weekend crying and listening to Joni Mitchell's song, People's Parties. So the description for this video is balancing the tension between yin and yang. Soft and Cozy features imagery from films such as The Little Girl Who Lived Down the Lane and Shoot the Moon. In the vein of Candace Bright's, the two protagonists, Diane Keaton and Jodie Foster, are each reimagined as doomed heroines in an existential collage. Attempts at finding serenity are thwarted by chaos and anxiety. Upcoming works. I'm currently working on 2 iterations of the same project, permanent fixtures. One of them is an installation to be shown at Ignite Gallery, and the other is a screen version to be shown on my website. Both of these projects detail my brain injury experience. For the first project, I received a production grant from the Toronto Arts Council. A follow-up to Celeste, permanent fixtures will feature 3 animations in a gallery space that will be projected onto domestic objects, a bathtub, Venetian blinds, and a vanity mirror. I'll project different sequences of animations onto each of these pieces. Working in increments of 5 minutes, each projector will play the series of animations in a distinctive order so that the viewer will never see exactly the same pattern of images. Reflections of the animations will bounce off of the mirrors, creating shapes and colors between the mirrors and light fixtures. The idea behind permanent fixtures is that the bathroom is a place where one can achieve a sort of spiritual transcendence through relaxation and self-reflection. At the time of conception, I was reading a bunch of interior design books from the 70s and 80s when I came across the following quote in the 1983 book, Beyond the Bath, A Dreamer's Guide by Thomas Dale Cowan. The author says, as the bathroom is increasingly designed for needs that go beyond the corporal, so are the flourishes that elevate the bathroom from utilitarian status to the level of high aesthetic and spiritual dimensions. When a room is created for personal comfort, pleasure, and self-expression, there should be few barriers between imagination and reality. The second project is based off of a Canada Council grant that I received that's specifically meant for digital artists during COVID. Here, I'll stream some of the animations that I've made for the installation. Yeah. So with this project, I'm going to open up the conversation via chats and comments about forced domesticity that people have experienced for various reasons. The animations explore two themes. First, art as an escape from forced domesticity, and second, the comfort of culpability as expressed within the self-help movement. The animations will be accompanied by music from my upcoming third album, Natural Beauty. This version of Permanent Fixtures will consider the following questions and issues. How does COVID-19 shift our perspective on making art at home as a sanctuary against disorder? Has the quarantine enabled the general population's empathy for those whose lives were previously broken by trauma? My obsession with self-care is a call for self-preservation and an underlying hope that sheer will, albeit magical, can heal my brain. Self-help offers the notion that I have the agency to heal myself. Can self-love heal the coronavirus? Permanent Fixtures asks how I can incorporate my fantasy-fueled creations with the imperative need to not leave the house. How can I create an environment that both accommodates and honors my needs for repose and art? How can I convince myself that none of this is really my fault? So, in terms of how we can adapt our experiences as artists to staying home and working in the digital, I think for me personally, a lot of my work is about trying to move the 2D into the 3D by creating animations that will eventually become installations. For me, to be honest, I think I'm actually at my best when I'm behind a computer editing. I prefer post-production to production, and adjusting to working at home has actually been pretty easy for me. I think that now this is a time that staying home has created a sense of longing for us. I don't know about you, but I've been dreaming a lot about traveling. And now with our art making practices, this can be fertile ground for our imaginations to be able to stretch further. I think that for artists who use really messy materials, I think this could be a good opportunity to explore the pricey world of Adobe or other programs like Unity or Blender that are free. There are tons of programs that are free. So yeah, overall, I think working from home can be fruitful and engaging. You might really have to sit with yourself and be honest about your needs and desires, but that's not a bad thing. Thank you for listening.
Great, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your generosity in sharing your insights about your practice, like your process, and just, yeah, I think that was really, really incredible to hear.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to do a quick time check. Okay, we've got about 20 minutes for Q&A. So yeah, so now we're going to move into the Q&A / kind of discussion portion of the talk. Like I mentioned at the start, if you have a question for Katie, you can type it into the chat box and I can read that out to Katie for you. And again, like the chat button is at the bottom of your Zoom window. Or if you want to ask Katie a question directly yourself, Zoom has something called the raise hand feature. So basically at the bottom of your Zoom window, there should be a button that says participants. And when you click that, a new block should open up somewhere on the side of your Zoom. And then at the bottom of that new block should be a button that says raise hand. And what that does is it will, Zoom will notify me that your hand is raised. And then when it comes to your question, I can ask you to unmute yourself so that you can speak directly to Katie. Okay. So now we'll go into the Q&A. So I have a couple of questions for Katie, if I can go first. I was wondering if you could quickly, for those of us who may not be so familiar with, I guess, Adobe programs or even how animations come together, could you perhaps quickly go do a quick walkthrough of how your process for one of your works comes together? Maybe how you get some of your initial concepts, but also like the tools or the programs that you use and how that, how those specific tools affect the way that you work.
Sure, yeah. So I use After Effects mostly and a bit of Premiere and Photoshop in my work. And After Effects, it's really, I feel like it's a pretty slow way of animating. I like it because it's really congruent to the concepts of musique concrète in terms of applying it to animation. Like I was using programs like Ableton Live for audio before, and physically they look very similar. So for an animation, the first thing that I do, is I will come up with a concept. So, for example, a few years ago, there's that amazing Hilma af Klint show at the Guggenheim in New York. And I went there and I saw it and I loved it. And I was so inspired by it. And I started to research theosophy. And I was trying to figure out how I could incorporate these kinds of theosophical concepts into my animation. So I started looking up theosophy symbols, and a lot of them are really round. So I started with circles, and then I started using triangles. And I took Hilma af Klint's color palette, and I used this app on my phone called the Pantone app, which is really amazing. It looks at colors from an image, and then it suggests a bunch of color palettes that you can use. So I took those color palettes and I made an animation with it. And I think, so one thing for me that I'm really interested in is how symbols and shapes can give the viewer a sort of allegory that it hints at ideas of a story, but it doesn't actually tell you a full story. So the viewer kind of has to interpret it for themselves. And so when I'm actually making animations, for me, I like to use a lot of rules and restrictions and how I'm going to do things. So I'll say, okay, I have 30 seconds to make an animation, and I'm going to be using these 3 effects, and I have to use these effects within like 10-degree increments. And I like to play around with that and see what happens. So in that way, I think my work is kind of chance-based. It's like a chance-based process. And then once I feel like I have a good groove with that, I start to allow my intuition to come into play with things, and I start to have ideas of images or scenes from, I like to kind of just use really kind of obscure things in my head and see how I can try to incorporate that. So I think that like me and Ron and Lucas were talking a few weeks ago, like I feel like my work is the strongest when both my intuition and my technical skills are working equally, and there's sort of like a sweet spot where I can just integrate the two and things are going great. Mm-hmm. So conceptually, I veer towards ethereal memories or spiritual concepts. I like I like things to be elusive and open to interpretation. So sometimes I'll start working on an animation, and after a while I'll realize what the animation is actually about. So for example, I made this animation in 2016 called YTV, and I was working on it, and then I realized that what I was creating was, it looked like an orange and plaid outfit that my grandmother had worn in the late 80s when she used to live next to the Eden's department store. And so that's just like what was coming out of my head.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then this past spring, I started working on an animation called Ethereal Instigation, which was based on a live performance of the musician Beverly Glenn Copeland's performance on Instagram. So it was about spiritual transcendence. So yeah, so again, I think intuition balances with technique.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it almost seems like a very like magical kind of I guess in line with your work. It seems like a magical sort of intuition sort of pops up, and through the process, it seems it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question here that kind of dovetails well into it. So you talked about transitioning your work from 2D to 3D. Do you have any interest in virtual reality? In doing like virtual reality work?
Maybe a bit. Depends. I think it could be cool. If I think if I was collaborating with someone, it could be interesting. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
might be into it.
Yeah, I wonder how you approach in thinking about this kind of virtual reality, which is kind of in between 2D and 3D, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not there's a digital space, but it's not like a physical installation. I wonder how you approach animation between like when you're making animation for a screen, so something that's sort of viewed like smaller or maybe more personal or more intimate, versus animation that's being made for like a physical installation, so something that's much happening on like a larger scale. And I guess what distinctions you make artistically, or how you're able to sort of keep the same um, visual like themes and emotions and affect of your work across both like a small scale and like a really large scale.
Mm-hmm. I think that like for installation, certain things work better than things for screens. Like I think just less narrative work, bigger shapes, and brighter colors just kind of make things better. I think that it's like the saying like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, kind of. Um, yeah, I don't
Hmm.
know if that answers your question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I think that I like again, I like allegories, and I like also like when a brand will create a number of different products that will kind of like each piece will tell a bigger story for the viewer, and it's always kind of elusive. So this is sort of like a trade example, but I like you know how McDonald's used to have characters like Grimace and
yeah,
hamburgers and stuff, and you would watch, you know, like the animations or like the little videos, the commercials, and then you go to McDonald's and you get the toy, and then you get like a bib with the image of Grimace on it, stuff like that. For me, it was always just really exciting because it's like there's something really hidden and mysterious, but all these layers to it, and it's a really cool way to create a world, I think.
yeah, yeah. No, that's yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Oh, I have another question here. Are there any aesthetics or influences that you have been especially drawn to during the pandemic?
um Yeah, I think like Beverly Glenn Copeland, she was really inspiring. And also, I'm really into this abstract painter, Miyoko Ito, and Ryuichi Sakamoto. I like pretty abstract work. Yeah, let me think. Yeah, I think that's about it, I guess.
Mhm. Is there something about these abstract works in particular that you think you're really drawn to during this time?
Um, oh, I really like the musician Laraji. I think I feel like right now it's a really special time in a way where we have to sit with ourselves and we have the opportunity to be spiritual and think about spirituality. And, you know, it's a time when we're all collectively humbled. And these artists, I think their work really speaks to that. Um, so yeah, I think it's an important time. Like I made the song New Beginnings in the spring because it just felt like, it feels, people keep saying this is a historic time. And I feel like we're really on the precipice of something brand new. And I think that we can embrace it, like however things go, I think it's a really important time to just like sit with it. And, whether things go poorly or they start to go better, we have to carry within us, um, like inner strength and inner reverence or something,
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's the vibe now.
Yeah, yeah. I think I really love the recent work that you've been making, and I think that kind of comes through that sense of like a very solid spiritual core, but in like a very healing way, not necessarily in like a prescriptive or religious way. And you also mentioned having an interest in creating calming or nurturing spaces through your work. I know I definitely feel that, but I'm just curious, what do you think makes something, or how would you define that's something like healing or calming or nurturing aesthetically? Or yeah.
Yeah. I think I really like the question of thinking about it. And for me, I think I made a list. Um, so for me, the first thing, okay, some of these things are a bit like hokey, but things
I'm,
like
I'm down with
Hawaii.
Cody. I love Cody.
Like I went to Hawaii in 2017 after like many years of wanting to go to Hawaii, and it was so beautiful, and that was super comforting for me. And things like the idea of Joni Mitchell's bedroom is like the maximum in comfort for me and nurturing. um I think also like things like female artifice, like very campy female artifice, like things. Right now I'm kind of working on a project about my grandmother, things
Mm,
like Joan Crawford. I find um, interior design and fashion from the 80s when they were doing 30s Art Deco. I find that very calming.
mm.
Um, Fran Lebowitz, I find very calming. Murder, She Wrote, and Amy Sedaris.
It's a great TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we have time for about one more question, and I've got a question from the chat here. So you talked about your need to create a comfortable sort of domestic space. Do you find that space when you're creating your art, or is it only after the work is done that you sort of find the coziness in it?
I don't know if other artists feel this way, but I find it's like the act of creating is cozy, but then like looking at the final project is like hard. I can't really look at it. I can't really really um enjoy it because I just think of like the headache that I was in making it, and then I see all the potential problems. I just see, like it kind of ruins it when you make it yourself in a way. You know what I mean? So no, I don't know. Like maybe when I like look back on it, I'm like, oh, the concept is comforting, but it's not necessarily super comforting.
Yeah, I think that's probably very relatable.
Yeah.
And I think that just sort of goes to show like the kind of generosity in a lot of artists' works, because it's like you're making things that you do come from your interests, but are nurturing for other people, and are healing or calming for other people, and not necessarily yourself when you're making it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who
Um,
knows, right? I mean, I don't know.
yeah. Maybe we have time for just one more question if anybody else wants just to have one last question. I mean, I definitely have questions too. Um, okay. I'm going to ask this question, and it might open up like a whole new can of worms, but I'm just going to do it anyway. So one thing that I really, really enjoyed about your work is kind of what I would call like the sort of idiosyncratic plays with the digital medium. So on the one hand, you have like work that is very calming and very nurturing, that's being made in digital media, which is traditionally being stereotyped as being very distracting and very hyper stimulating. And at the same time, when I think about your work, when I'm not looking at it and when I think back about your work, I always have this after impression of your work being very minimalist because the shapes are very clear and they're very like solid shapes. But when I actually like am in front of it, I sort of realize that they're actually quite filled with like a lot of very pleasurable and like meditative details. So there's like a lot of patterning, there's a lot of layering, and like a lot of gradients. So something I'm always thinking about your work is whether it's helping us or maybe encouraging like a very slow looking or generating a very patient eye, or if it's generating like a very mesmerized eye, so an eye that's really like seduced and like hypnotized and kind of just drawn in and sort of lulled in by all this visual pleasure. Yeah, if that makes sense. I wonder if do you have any thoughts about that? Like, I guess like a patient, slow looking versus like a very like seduced looking.
I think it's an interesting question. I think that, like I said before, like I think for me, the way that I make animation, it is so much about rules and it's chance based. So if it takes a long time to get something across, like that for me is the personal pleasure of creating it in that way. But I do think, like I have been, since I started doing animation, I've been pretty interested in how it can be incorporated into a gallery space. And like, I feel like it's been maybe sort of a battle to just convince people that painting, like you can treat animation for a gallery space and you could treat it like another medium like painting or something. And so if you look at a painting, if you absorb a painting, you sit and you really stare at it and like you eat it basically, you know? So I think that like you asked me before about some of my early influences, and a lot of them are like early computer graphic artists making work from like the 50s to the 80s. And for me, what's really interesting about this work is a lot of it seems like it's a continuation of abstract expressionism, but in motion, you know? And I think if you treat computer graphic work like that, then definitely takes a long time to consume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. Were those the links? So Katie posted earlier in the chat some links to some work or some source material that you're quite inspired by.
Yeah, that was like before I decided to go to art school, what I was consuming a lot of. Yeah.
Cool. What are the links again?
They're well, there's two of them. One of them is sort of like early video art by, I believe, an artist named John Whitney. And then there's this other video by this artist called Ron Hayes, who used this technique called scanimation. And it was like analog techniques to make what we would think now are like digital techniques, like really psychedelic kind of outlines of people, things that current artists are using with virtual reality. So they would use like really tactile techniques and put them over a screen, over a lens, and create really cool effects, or like video synth kind of things from the 70s. And then the third video that I posted is this Montreal artist named Emmanuel Lagrange Paquet. He made this video for school called Magic Crazy Box. And it's like, he made it in 2008, and now watching it, it kind of just looks like it's this giant precursor to Vaporwave. It's like all the amazing references in one. Like he references like California Raisins, Groundhog Day, Home Alone, Videodrome, and all these like amazing things in a way that like I never thought was possible until I saw that. And then I was like, oh yeah, like video art is a really important manifestation of art that can really communicate a lot. And he used this cool program. I don't know if people still use it anymore. It's called Quartz Composer, and it's like a node-based, also like chance experimental process program for it. It's super cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. I haven't heard of it, but I will look at that and check that out. And yeah, that sounds really incredible. Again, those links are in the chat box to the side there if you haven't had a chance to look at it. So Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. I could keep asking you questions forever, but I think we'll have to end it here, unfortunately. Thank you again, Katie, so much for doing this and being our very first speaker in this new series.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.